Hello and welcome to episode 340 of Sutton Impact Family Style. I'm Jason and I'm once again joined by our friend Fred. How's it going, Fred?
Hey Jason, how you doing?
Great. Um, I think the biggest sort of story I want to talk about this week is the Pat McAfee paying Aaron Rodgers and other guests to be a part of his podcast. Um, I feel like it opened up a lot of interesting doors, and then I think also a larger discussion about like if every athlete's like Micah Parsons and Draymond Green, and it just becomes the norm to have your own podcast where you're kind of exclusive to yourself anyway. Like, where are we going in journalism? And then, you know, what were your initial thoughts on finding out Aaron Rodgers got a bunch of money from Fred McAfee?
My initial reaction was one of okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
Um, I, you know, I think that much like I've always been under the understanding that the artist who plays in this at the Super Bowl at halftime at the Super Bowl, I had forever thought that okay, they're getting money from the NFL to show up and entertain people.
I assume so as
But
well.
in
Yeah,
fact, right. In fact, it's the other way around where they have to pay the NFL to be. So that notion of like what makes sense in terms of who's getting paid to do what and what side of it. In this case, you would think, a guy who gets an opportunity to be on a show, radio show, TV show, whatever it might be, they're getting something out of that by the exposure and the chance to kind of maybe speak to the whys behind some things that, whatever it might be, explain their side of the story. But, in this case, we find out that Saban and Aaron Rodgers are getting some big time paychecks to be on these shows. That said, it makes sense because you got a guy like McAfee who's trying to show up and be and stand out amongst a sea of other people. Hey, listen, if I can get these guys come consistently, it's going to make my show better. It's going to increase our ratings. I'm going to be able to generate more revenue. So why don't I pay these guys? It really kind of just made sense to me from like the logistics, kind of the gears of capitalism kind of sense.
yeah. It felt like responsible capitalism, which is something I like to throw out from time to time that doesn't exist, but it's a beautiful thought. But I saw McAfee, like he and AJ Hawk and the rest of his mullet clanned little cohorts that talk on his show all laughed. And they were like, since Aaron Rodgers became a regular on our show, we went up 500% and sold our company to ESPN. He's like, he helped us. We believe that if you
Mm.
help us, you're getting paid. And he's like, look around this room. He's like, everybody that's here now, he's like, was here from the beginning. And he's like, trust me. He's like, I paid them. And he's like, I didn't come from a ton of money. I believe that you pay the people that help you. And I don't know how sincere that is, but it came off very sincere. But I love the sentiment of it.
Yeah, it would be nice if, especially, and I guess it's easier on his side, right? Because it sounds like he's the owner of that entity
Yeah.
as opposed to some large corporation, right? Where, and it's not that corporations are the evil of the world. I mean, the fact of the matter is that like a large corporation, it becomes more of a machine than it does like, a business.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to kind of have an example where it hasn't gotten too big to still be personable. And so I actually think it's a really cool thing. I would be hopeful that that would be a trend that would start. Now, the other side of it is, people, you and I, the rest of the public who are, scraping by and trying to make ends meet and all that sort of stuff. And then, oh, hey, listen, here's an athlete who's playing a game we would love to play, pulling down $50 million a year, and this is another $1 million in his pocket for just going to talk. Does that seem, so there's that aspect to it too that can be bitter, but that part of it is almost like a separate argument and part of the story. The nuance of just that process of McAfee and that show taking care of the people who have made them what they are, I think that's a really good thing.
And the nice thing is, I kind of feel like, I mean, with my industry going on a strike right now, and SAG still holding strong with their strike, even though the WGA was able to settle theirs, is that it seems like the general public, for the most part, seems to understand where the problem and the greed lies. Not that everybody isn't a little bit greedy on some level, but they seem to understand that it's not the talent, it's the people above the talent that, are the ones holding on too much of the money. So I think the other thing for journalism, I know ESPN is like, well, if he's exclusive to you, then we can't get him to talk for us. And but like I was saying earlier, like with the way journalism seems to be going, with athletes having their own podcasts and their own way to get their stories out, like I don't think exclusivity is going to be something new. I think that's going to be just something that just is. Like that's going to be the standard. Is if I'm Minka Parsons or I'm one of his friends, like why am I going to go to ESPN and talk when I could just go talk on his podcast? And yeah,
You're exactly right. When have, like, I mean, other than like post game interviews, I can't think of the time that I've seen Draymond on somebody else's show. Um, and he's obviously one of the more known athletes who has their own podcast. But you're exactly right, and I think honestly, in terms of supply and demand, I think that is something that will make people who have either developed themselves as a radio personality, whether it be sports or anything else, because this won't just stick to sports. I'm sure that
no,
if this isn't already occurring in political realms or talk TV, that kind of stuff, I'm sure that it will be something that certainly comes about soon. But then it allows people to market themselves appropriately and be able to have a little bit more leverage against some of those bigger entities that have, for a long sense, really kind of owned the process.
yeah. And as far as the general public looking at a rich person making more money, I mean, it just is across the board. And I'd rather see people, at least with Aaron Rodgers, it's his time. He's the draw. He's the one that's going to make national headlines off anything he says off the show. So he seems like he should be, as opposed to just a random stockholder who just keeps begging for more money off the top. I mean, or more CEO bonuses. Like, at least this is tangible. Like, this is why you earned what you earned, right? Like,
Yeah,
there were so many stories based on, stuff he said on Fred McAfee show that went national, that was talked about on ESPN, was talked about on Fox, was talked about on all this, whether it's his ayahuasca, his, sleeping in huts and doing Aaron Rodgers stuff. Like, that all came about through the McAfee podcast, which brought eyes to McAfee's podcast. And I mean, I don't know, it made sense. I just thought, I mean, it seemed like it was a story that, the worldwide leader did not want people talking about in a positive light. Because they know what that means for them moving forward, is that they got to start paying, the athletes they want to talk to, which is just, I mean, I don't know. It is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, and I, it's funny because I kind of I took the article from a different place, and it's hard to know, like, what is the intent. The person who wrote the article for, was it the New York Times or one of the papers out in New York, I think, is the one that broke it. But it's hard to know what the intent of the author or of the journalist was.
Right.
But, so whenever you don't know the intent, it's always, it's many times human nature to assume the intent. And so I wasn't sure if it was one of those things where it was somebody trying to be critical of McAfee, the way they're doing things and that sort of stuff, or if they were just trying to be critical of Rodgers for, well, you got all this money and now you're just like demanding more. But again, like we were talking about, truth of the matter is it's a relationship between the McAfee show and Rodgers that benefits both of them. There's a financial element to it. And so I think somebody, if there is someone, if the intent was to try to bring a negative light to either one of these guys, it's just not well placed.
No. And sports storytelling in general is just getting weirder and weirder every year. I mean, you look at what is currently, if you look at the current lineup, including some LeBron stuff of like sports documentaries, they really aren't documentaries. They're autobiographies. But they're being purported as,
exactly right.
But they're going to be purported as, hey, check out the new LeBron documentary. But it's like, you can't have a documentary about yourself for the most part. Like, there is a difference between a documentary, as flawed as that concept is in general. You're still pointing the camera, you're still editing the footage, all that yada yada. But I mean, if I'm telling my story as fact, like, it works better if it's called an autobiography or a biography, because I know Barry Sanders has one. It seems like athletes are taking a real ownership over their story and their voice, and they're not just going to give it to ESPN or anybody other. they want to make sure that that whatever gets out is what they want out, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, documentary almost, to that point, documentary almost has the sound of something artistic or genuine or like a true
Right.
depiction of the reality of the situation, whereas autobiography or biography almost sounds like something forced or, you know, massaged. It doesn't come across with the same candid or candor, um, which is an interesting thing for those guys.
It really is. Um, I was going to jump to the NFL, but I can't. All I can think about is Wimby highlights. Uh, I've watched
Guy
two.
is amazing. Like
He
he and it's honestly, as corny as it sounds, it starts with the fact that he just seems like a genuine, awesome human being.
he does. He seems very cool. Supposedly, as soon as he signed with the NBA, he moved to San Antonio and has spent every day there with the coaches and the trainers. And you can see, like, he still looks very skinny. I mean, Maria came in the room and she saw him on TV and she's like, that guy's so. And I'm like, he is, but if you saw him when he first was playing in France and when he first got drafted, I'm like, he has put on some muscle. When you have.
Yeah, there might be a little bit more of a bicep there, but certainly I don't know if there's anything lower body.
Yeah. But I'm sure he's strengthened ligaments and stuff. But like when you watch him, 'cause you saw him at summer league for a little bit, and then watching him now, like he just he does look like a 7'5" Kevin Durant with extra long arms.
Yeah, and I mean, I was, I had heard about him. My son Keaton, who you've had on the show once or twice before, had been all over all over him and his story in France, probably about a year and a half before he really kind of started to become well known to most of the public, the sports loving public. So kind of had seen some highlights of him from overseas and stuff like that. And when we got to see him in summer league, it was eye opening how thin he looked. But what was unbelievable was the handle and how well he was able to operate outside of the 3-point line and get to the hoop.
Yeah.
For a guy that size, it was crazy. And then so once he starts to, when you see him hitting jumpers, and it looks like a nice smooth shot.
It does.
Like force, like some, you see some big men who were like going up and down the court, and you can see it just kind of seems like a labored activity. Anything that requires grace, or he just looks like a natural athlete that you would imagine being like 6'3" and moving that way. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. It's hard to kind of like hit your brain that this is happening because there's elements that just seem CGI like,
Yeah.
as opposed to human. So, but the thing that's really stood out in the first couple preseason games is how far he's come from what we saw in summer league. The first game in summer league, he had some struggles. Didn't necessarily do great. Seemed like it was really getting pushed around. Second game, he did much better. But these games in the preseason, he's really just the growth that he's shown in a couple months leaves me in awe of what this kid's going to be able to do.
It really does. Yeah, if you haven't watched his highlights yet, I mean, he can almost dunk from the floor with flat-footed somehow. He's altering shots, and again, if you have a 7'4" guy with at least a 7'6", 7'7" wingspan, like you have to think about that every time you drive to the hoop, because he's like a Mr. Fantastic, like just stretch arm over here, stretch arm over there, like he can recover really well. And again, I'm sure we'll see him dating, I don't know, Ice Spice or somebody pretty soon, because you have to date famous people. But I just feel like, the fact that he came in with all this hype, greatest prospect in any sport ever, which has been thrown about, ballyhooed and all those good words. But the fact that he stayed in San Antonio and just worked on his game all summer for a young, an 18, 19-year-old, I think that's, for somebody being told they're the best thing ever to still be working like that, I think is speaks really highly of him.
Yeah, and think about it. You match a kid, you match somebody like that who seems to have a really good personality and base, for his personality to start with, and then you match him up with a guy like a Tim Duncan who's still associated with the Spurs and is still very much involved. I'm going to guess that he was, working with him in the off season. You match those two things together, and you just really are looking at like just a temperament that could be special, especially working with a coach as good, experienced, knowledgeable as Pop. But it just seems like a recipe with all the elements that could just be amazing. Honestly, I do think the one thing that stands out to me that I have in the back of my mind I can't get over, just after seeing it a little bit in the Summer League piece, and granted, those guys are all fighting for roster spots, or just even to get on a G League team. So there's a different level of desperation, I guess, in some cases. But like you could see guys like kind of almost targeting him.
Oh yeah.
To match him up for contact. And so I'm worried that with all the hype that he's coming in with, that it's going to bruise a lot of egos of guys who have worked really hard and gotten into the league and stayed in the league. So I can see him being a target for a lot of physical play. And that's the only thing that worries me about him being able to get through.
Yeah, and then just like we talked about earlier, like he does move with grace. Like they call him a gazelle. Like he does, when you see how large he is, he does move like a smaller person. But you do worry about just, his legs are so light. It just feels like someone's just going to run into it and break it in half. I don't know. Obviously, I would never want that. It's like a weird, like you just watch him and you're like, again, he looks like you created him in NBA 2K. And you're like,
yep.
Here's this
video game is definitely it's a great analogy.
Well, because you haven't been on our show, and you were affected by some of these recent NBA maneuverings. What are your thoughts on the Dame Lillard, Drew Holiday moves?
Well, I think those two specifically are kind of fascinating, right? Like,
yeah,
for I think maybe for 72 hours, the Bucks were like the talk of the league. Oh my God, they added Dame. Who's going to beat these guys are number one? And that move precipitated the Celtics getting Drew.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, all that huge balloon that had suddenly appeared in Brooklyn or in Milwaukee was suddenly burst. And everybody was so quick to say, like, okay, now the Celtics are the ones. With any of these trades, it's always tough to know how things are going to match up. It seems like they would be a great fit. I think the Dame and Giannis pairing is awesome. I love both those guys. Love their games, and I think that those two games working together are scary as hell for any opposing team.
Of course.
Any other fan base. Being a Massachusetts guy, I'm really excited to see the next evolution of the Celtics. I feel like Drew brings a toughness that I was really nervous that they had lost with shipping Smart out. And but also at the same time brings like a new excitement and energy.
Yeah.
All the reports from Celtics camp are that he just like hit the ground running, like really getting along well with everybody, but at the same time like really pushing people. And I think that maybe that new voice, they talk about with coaches sometimes when you got a coach who's been there for a while and people start to just not hear him anymore because it's the same thing over and over. Maybe that might be the case with the Patriots, but whole nother story. But, so Holiday coming in and being that new voice, being that new presence, approaching things a little bit different, I think that really could be a big spark for Brown and for Tatum, guys who have shown that they're willing to like take that kind of push and respond to it. So, really interested to see what the Celtics can run with the starting five. They run a 5 out. I don't know how you defend that.
No. And
So
you got yet another body to throw at Dame, who's probably going to be extra motivated to go at Dame as a great defender, Drew Holiday, when they do play each other head to head,
right,
which I'm really looking forward to.
right, and it has a history of shutting him down too.
Yeah. I think they're weaker against Giannis, losing, Robert Williams as much as, he was on the fourth, of course, or he wasn't. But, I mean, now you've got so many bodies to throw at Dame and this new, it's exciting. And then you've got the mess in Philadelphia and whatever Miami's doing
Yeah,
around out the East, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. I think I don't know. I haven't been able to figure out if I'm paying closer attention or if there was just more significant moves this year. But it just seems like there's a lot going on in the league and a lot of things to look at. Even Chris Paul being,
Golden State. Yeah.
with the Warriors, like that could affect that team immensely. Like I'm really interested to see how that all plays out. Um, you know, the additions for the Spurs, additions and subtractions, I guess, right? Not the Spurs. I'm sorry, for the Suns.
Yeah.
That's going to be really interesting to see how you have like 3 or 4 high scoring guys sharing the court. How's that going to work out? There's really some interesting things that are going to be panning out over the first couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean,
So
Dallas is,
it's-
with Kyrie is interesting. The Lakers are always interesting. The Clippers are weird. Oklahoma City and New Orleans are very exciting depending on how those young players develop. Like, yeah, just across the board. And then there's, and then we still don't know who the next guy is. Hopefully, it's not just boring ass Carl Anthony Towns, but the next guy to the next name to get traded.
Yep.
Because everybody that's gotten traded this offseason, it feels exciting. Like Drew Holiday to the Celtics, Dame Lillard to the Bucks. Those are contenders getting all-star level players. Whereas, like, if the Knicks get Carl Anthony Towns, I don't know what that does for the, it's sort of like, eh.
Right. And I think the NBA is really in a good spot where pick a team.
Yeah.
If you're a member of the fan base for almost any team, you're super excited about what this. I mean, even if you're rooting for the Wizards in Washington, you like got a brand new backcourt. Yes, Beal's gone, guy you can rely on, but like a lot of youth, a lot of energy. Hey, we could make something happen. If you mentioned OKC, like I don't know if there's a team that's got a bigger group of young talent
I don't think there is.
that could be which makes sense. They've had like 46 draft picks over the past few years, and another like 20 to come up in the next 9.
Yeah.
But like I said, just go through and pick a team, and there's something for you to be excited about in the NBA this year, and I think that bodes really, really, really well for the league as a whole.
Yes. Apologies to Charlotte. You still suck.
yeah. Yeah, but you got Ball coming back from an injury, so
Yeah.
like at least you got something.
Okay, yeah. But it seems like, everybody else on that team is in trouble with the law or something. So, yeah. All right. Well, now
And
let's
that was
get...
probably one of the biggest things that stood out to us at Summer League was their draft pick, Brandon.
Miller, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was blanking on his name. He just did not look the part, and it wasn't even his play on the court. I mean, he didn't look great on the court, but even he was really kind of relegated to hang out by himself, whether that was his own decision or the way the coaches were working things. It was really interesting. All the other young guys, like the highly touted guys, Wimby, any of those guys, Scoot, who got hurt in the first game, but like he was still there, still making a presence, still involved with his teammates. All these other guys like developing like bonds, and Miller was over there like opposite end of the court from his other team, just doing the shooting by himself. It was really interesting, even seeing like those off the court things.
Yeah.
So he's definitely a guy that I would be concerned about, and will really be watching closely for the first month or two of the season.
Yeah. Well, let's move to everybody's favorite subject, and that's the NFL. It looks like we're recording this before the 12 o'clock, the 1 o'clock game kickoff your East Coast time. So Baltimore is up right now. Looks like they're going to win. Um, but yeah, well, first let's, because we don't get to do this very often, let's talk to a sad New England Patriot fan.
You know, so I'm gonna be perfectly candid. I did not go into the season expecting we were going to make the playoffs. Maybe we could get in as 6 or 7 seed, maybe if
Sure, yeah.
everything went right. But I really went into the season being like, okay, way too many quality teams in the AFC. We got a really tough schedule. Not going to be our season. That said, I still am incredibly disappointed with just how poor we've looked. I have not lost faith in Belichick. The guy didn't forget how to coach football. But there's some things obviously amiss. And for us to only have 55 points scored and be by far the lowest scoring team in the
Yeah.
entire NFL, we could have had more points with Patricia. I'm just going to put that out there. That's probably would have been true. So that part is very, very disappointing. At the same time, it's fair. I guess I'm also on the minority where I'm like, listen, this is okay for us to get our butts handed to us for a little while after 20 years of just euphoria.
Yeah. So, are you out on Mac Jones?
Uh, as of 2 weeks ago, I was not. The last 2 weeks make me wonder if I am wrong. He certainly, I mean, you hear stories like he's trying too hard, he's pressing, or he's getting used to a new offense. All that. So there's just some basic things from a decision-making process that have nothing to do with any of those other things.
Yeah.
Like, you're just making decisions in the pocket or as you're moving outside of the pocket that should not be made. You're forcing throws to Parker down the sideline where he's blanketed. You can see that there's no way that you can look at that. I know that maybe you could say like, oh, hey, my guy, I'm throwing him up 50-50 balls and he's going to come down with them most of the time. This is beyond that. It's like, okay, this is my first choice. This is my only choice. I'm not even looking at my second and third read. I'm just going with this first one, and I'm hucking it down the field, and okay, another 3 and out. So that's the part that's really starting to get me worried, is that, the regression that we saw last year, there was a lot of talk about like that was because of Patricia or because of changing all these other things. But the regression this year, like, there's none of that could be used as the explanation. It just boils down to the fact like he's regressing in his decision making, and that's when I get really nervous about a quarterback for any team, especially for the team that I've always rooted for.
Yeah, I always saw him as like a seat, like like the floor of a Kirk Cousins. Like he had all these intangibles and a pretty good arm, and he'd proven it throughout college. And I thought he'd come in and like maybe he's never going to be top 10 quarterback, but he'd be the guy that's just so solid. But we definitely have not seen that. Then I guess my last
Yeah, and that was always the Patriots' claim to fame. We're not going to be great at anything with the exception of Brady, but we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot. We're going to let you make mistakes. We're not going to make mistakes. And they don't have that anymore, and so that's a big reason why they just look really, really bad. They get penalized every possession. They got more turnovers than they've ever had, and so yeah, they look really, really bad. That part's discouraging, but I'll be the internal optimist, and we still got time to figure it out. That's not going to happen.
This is my last torturing a Patriot question. For this conversation, for you are Robert Kraft, and I am your assistant G. I'm your little concierge, whatever. I come talk to you, and I'm like, all right, Bill Belichick, 72 and 76 without Brady. He hasn't been a great GM. He's 72 years old. Are you keeping him for another year?
Yes, I am.
And are you taking away his GM responsibilities?
Again, go ahead. Sorry.
Are you taking away his GM responsibilities, or are you letting him still buy the groceries, as they say?
No, I'm taking away his GM piece because that's when the team was at its best was when we had, like a Scott Pioli or somebody like that, kind of keeping him in check and being able to, like, just kind of call him out. So finding somebody who's got a strong enough personality where they're going to be able to step in and be like, okay, coach, what do you want to do? Okay, I hear that, but we're not doing that. So you need that person. And I think that that's been shown in the NFL throughout. I don't know that there's probably been a handful, but I can't think of too many coaches / GMs that were successful in both endeavors. And I think that had worked for a long time. It should have worked that way. So, yes, I'm keeping them. I'm also telling them, hey, listen, you need, what is it? I think 18 wins.
Yeah.
I'm giving you this year and 2 more years.
Okay.
That's it. And we're bringing in this guy to be the GM. He did a decent job last year with the defensive picks that we have. But offensively, we continue to struggle. We need a guy who's going to be able to have a good eye for offensive talent, and then you're going to utilize those pieces the best that you can.
Okay. Well, I'll do my Steeler minute while I'm going to ask you to give me your 3 things you're most interested by in the NFL through 5 weeks. But as a Steeler fan, we watched now at Penguins games, even Penguins games in Washington, D.C., there were a chance to fire Matt Canada, who has been the worst offensive coordinator in all of football. All 3 seasons he's been offensive coordinator, a job he never qualified for as a college coach. He somehow finagled his way to be the LSU OC, in case you didn't know, and they fired him 4 games into the season. But we got some bad news as a Steeler organization that they are not moving on from Canada this year. My only theory is that he and Tomlin were on a retreat hiking, and Tomlin started to fall off a cliff, and now he owes Matt Canada, who saved his life, a life debt, and that's the only thing I could think of. Or some sort of monkey paw situation. It's Halloween season. A curse. I can't figure out what it is, but it can't be based on merit. Because Tomlin's he loves to say, varsity, JV. I wouldn't let Matt Canada be the freshman team offensive coordinator. So I just don't know where if you're holding everybody, standard is the standard, Mr. Cliche, you got to come up with something better. Because I also saw that you were named not the Mike Tomlinson's, but if you are, you were named the 3rd best coach in the NFL this week. And I just don't see how anybody that employs Matt Canada can be considered that. And you've lost my faith, Mike Tomlin. So.
Yeah, I think there's definitely reason to wonder if there's some kind of conspiracy theory there. Because to your point, you can't justify him still having a job based on performance.
No. And I know you don't want to cave into fans at Penguins games and Steeler games screaming fire Canada, but they gave you, as, the first year they were like, okay, it's because Ben Roethlisberger kept changing your plays and wouldn't do anything but shotgun. It's like, all right, fine. Then last year it's like, well, you had rookie quarterbacks. And it's like, okay. What, like, at some point it comes down to performing. Like I said, they were one of the most inept offenses in all of football. And I don't know. It's very frustrating. But that was my Steeler minute, so.
Yeah, I can't. Well, I can sympathize. I think you guys have still outscored us by, I think, 3 or 4 touchdowns this season. So,
yeah.
I guess you got that going for you. But I would imagine that we're like, with 55 points scored so far, we're heading towards like some historically bad.
Yeah, you're fighting with the Giants who scored 62 points.
Yeah.
All right, so what are your 3 things most interesting NFL takes of the first 5 weeks?
Well, I've always been an underdog guy, so let me kind of stick with that theme. You start with the performance of the Bucs and Baker.
Yeah.
I would have, if I had to put money on a team that was going to get the last team to get a win this year, I would have picked the Bucs going into the season. And this just proves why I'm not a professional gambler. But catching a couple of their games, Baker looks as good as I've ever seen him look. for the most part. And that team seems to be playing inspired football.
Yeah.
Defense seems to be, a lot closer to what it was the year that they won the Super Bowl versus, the year afterwards. So, they got they're having a lot more success than I predicted or expected. So that really stands out as a surprise.
And Baker now has a C on his chest, too.
Go ahead.
Shout out to Baker Mayfield, is now a captain on that team.
Wow.
Yeah, they named him captain last week. And it's like, here's a guy that was, begging for a roster spot for the most part. Talking about Kyle Trask was going to take over for his position. And yeah, it's a cool story. I'm very in on Baker.
Yeah, and I've always been a fan of his, quite honestly. Like, I like dudes who are just genuine and honest. Whether you like what they're saying, whether you don't like what they're saying, just a guy who's just going to be, this is who I am, this is what I think, this is how I feel. I've never seen him be, disrespectful. He gets pissed, sure. Yeah. He's been scrutinized an insane amount. Always kind of questioned, and always has that underdog mentality because he was a walk-on originally, right?
Yeah.
In college. So I root for him and for the Bucks. So it's great to see them at the top of that division. It is very surprising.
Very.
But nothing against them, and pulling for them. Second underdog story is Puka Nacua. Late round draft pick, comes out of, nowhere. Had been hearing rumblings, good rumblings from off-season camp and stuff like that about this kid, but nowhere near what you would have expected. And obviously he walks into a situation that's, just kind of made for, a TV movie story kind of thing where, Cup's out. They're looking for somebody that they can throw the ball to. You got this big, athletic young guy who just doesn't mind going across the middle or anywhere, and seems to have just hands of steel. Or hands of steel sounds bad for a receiver, but
I thought it was I get it.
Claws.
I don't know,
yeah, claws of steel. Maybe that's not so bad, but doesn't seem to drop anything that comes his way. And again, from interviews I've seen of this kid, seems like just a quality dude.
Yeah.
And so, again, somebody who was probably not expected to even make the team or maybe make the practice squad and is really just doing amazing things. Even with Cup coming back last week, he still, was an integral part of the offense. So that's exciting to see. And also really, really kind of surprising because I just thought that McVay was going to kind of go back to the well, be all about the dudes that he had on offense. But to his credit, saw some talent, saw a lot of talent in this kid. He's really utilizing it.
Yeah.
Another surprise, obviously, that comes out of LA was the whole moving of Cam Akers, and one of the possible reasons for that being that Akers was saying some suggested things about McVay's wife, apparently. It's been reported, and so that was interesting and surprising. But if any of the posts were accurate and correct, I can't blame McVay for saying this guy needs to go.
No, and this is after, last year we talked about Cam Akers wanting to quit. It feels like it's just been a match made in hell from day one. So, all promise of a young rookie running back that was going to take over, and it just did not happen. And it seems like it's definitely a lot of Cam Akers' fault, if you will.
Yep. And then in a league where there's really not a ton of surprises beyond the couple that we talked about, I mean, it's not a surprise that Carolina's 0-5. Not a surprise that Philadelphia is 5-0. Not a surprise that San Fran's looking amazing.
Amazing.
That, there's, I guess maybe the Giants really taking a step back. Maybe last year being the outlier and this being more true. If I'm a Giants fan, I'm definitely nervous because we just locked up Dan Jones for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
This is what we're getting. You know, for as a Patriots fan, and that's not even to like kick somebody else to misery loves company kind of thing. Our situation, like if Mac isn't the guy, like we're not married to him for the next 5 to 6 years.
No, but like you said, you got Daniel Jones in New York. You have Deshaun Watson in Cleveland, who's not playing again. And then you've got the Russell Wilson debacle in Denver, where if they cut him this year, they owe him $80 million now on the cap. But if they wait another year, they owe him even more. Yeah. And if he gets hurt, he gets a guaranteed fourth year. So it's like, I don't know what you do for any of those teams.
It really hands are tied in those situations where, like, going to be a lot harder to break out of or to fix what seems to be ailing those teams.
Yeah. And the Deshaun Watson one is odd too because the head coach did not protect him, He said he's cleared healthy. He just doesn't feel like he can play. Like, I mean, that's not protecting your guy, right? In the media. That's not, oh yeah, we just don't feel like he can go. He's not strong enough in the arm. He's basically saying our doctor said he's healthy and he is choosing not to play because he says his arm is not ready. And it's like, wow, that says something considering he's got the biggest guaranteed money in the history of the NFL.
Right. I mean, very much a Kawhi thing, right? Like,
yeah.
But in that situation, Kawhi didn't have the baggage that Deshaun has, right?
No.
So in terms of public perception, you and I both know exactly how that's going to go for a guy who's on questionable, shaky ground already. It'd be interesting.
Yeah. So,
but other than those things that we talked about, really the biggest surprise is one that you kind of walked me into at the beginning, just how putrid the New England offense has been this year. They, have always relied on the fact that they can coach up players to be able to get the maximum out of them. You get this is how you get your Julian Edelmans or your Danny Woodheads or Wes Welkers, those kind of guys who had been on other teams and hadn't necessarily flourished, but then came here and they figured out the coaching staff figured out how to utilize their strengths and really make them great players. There's a lot of interesting pieces on New England.
Yeah.
Certainly none of the guys are without talent. I mean, there's guys, they're in the NFL because they're talented human beings. So the inability of the coaching staff and the introduction of Bill O'Brien that I was really bought into, I thought, like, hey, listen, this is, definitely going to work. A guy who's used to that locker room and that mentality is going to know how to do things. It's very surprising to me that has not translated to at least even like average level numbers.
Yeah, it's true.
So those are the three things that really kind of stand out as surprising. But I will say the league, the last couple of years, and this year continues it, I've never enjoyed the NFL more than I have now. Because there's so many teams that are good, because there's so many players that are just amazing players to watch and can do incredible things. I root against the Dolphins and the Chiefs beforehand, so like I should just be ingrained not to like Tyreek Hill, but he's incredible to watch.
He is.
You see those pieces that Miami has. Any of those guys are electric. You see a guy like Kelsey having a ton of success, and just seems like a guy that you would root for, regardless of what team. Like, so there's so many different guys, whether it's personalities that you like a Kittle or, any of those guys that are just kind of fun-loving dudes, or like, just like a guy who's just going to blow things up.
Yeah.
And that's enjoyable too. Like, there's just so many different elements that from the league that you can really get out of it. And at the same time, a ton of teams are competitive, and don't know who's going to win each week. Like, that's the stuff that I think is just awesome.
Indeed. Well, the games are about to start, so I'll let you get going and let our audience get going. Enjoy football, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.